Welcome to the Bardlings Banter channel. This is Matthew, and today we got another episode of the Cauldron for you. This is going to be episode 2. Episode 1, where we created the Beaver Folk, was so successful that I just had to go ahead and make another. Just to keep things fresh, instead of making another monster today, we'll actually be taking some time to learn about how to homebrew magic items. I almost exclusively give out homebrewed magic items to my players. Do you know why? Because it's the perfect way to integrate their backstory, the campaign, and just fun flavor into your campaign. But how do you go about doing it without giving your players a way overpowered item? Well, the first thing, and this is classic D&D, is to actually just give them an item that levels up with them. Maybe it has abilities that at first seem kind of mundane. It's just a +1 longsword. But as they explore more about the item, as they explore more about their character, that sword gains more abilities. When creating a homebrewed magic item, there are really 3 different components that you really want to look at to add to whatever magic item you're creating. The first is combat, meaning you can very easily make a longsword, like I said, and make it a +1 magic longsword. That's perfectly okay. The second thing you can add is non-combat oriented abilities. So again, that +1 longsword. So it's a +1 longsword that maybe emits a light. Not always useful in combat, but your players can find new and exciting ways to make that more useful. One thing I actually like to do a lot is give magic items feat abilities for feats that people normally don't bother taking. I like to use the chef feat. I like to use parts of other feats, like, hey, go ahead and give them a ring that allows them to be proficient in heavy armor. Adding feat abilities to a magic item can be a really good way to add flavor and new abilities to your team with some good context and knowing that things are going to be a little bit easier to balance rather than making up a brand new ability. So those are the first 2 aspects. Again, a combat mechanic, i.e. this is a +1 longsword, so it does more damage. Or that could be something like this sword does sonic damage, +2 sonic damage per hit. And then, as I said, there's non-combat abilities, such as this sword emits light. This sword gives you the ability to maybe cast a spell-like ability. Like, this sword allows you to cast Zone of Truth once per day. Or this sword allows you to cast Detect Magic once per day. Cool, flavorful things that in combat aren't always necessarily that useful, but out of combat, extremely useful sometimes. And then the third thing is roleplay aspects. Now, good roleplay aspects obviously combine those other 2 things as well. But what I mean specifically by roleplay aspects as it pertains to a magic item, I'm talking about things that don't actually give any concrete bonus. A very common thing to do and kind of tropey is kind of we're talking the One Ring situation where you get this longsword and you get to tell your player, oh, you love this sword, it's your favorite sword, you don't want anyone else touching this sword, this is your baby. Or, maybe the longsword has contained within it the spirit of a long-dead warrior who used to own it. And as time goes on, that warrior becomes more and more sentient and more aware of their situation, and actually gets to the point where they can communicate with the new wielder of the sword. that's a great campaign idea right there. So, just like with homebrewing a monster, it's always good to pick and choose abilities that are already in circulation in D&D. So again, give the sword or give the shield or give the armor spell-like abilities. Abilities that are parts of feats, particularly, again, I love using this for feats that aren't typically used. So no, don't give someone a crossbow that allows them to essentially have the crossbow expert feat. Don't do that. But maybe give them a crossbow that gives them +2 to initiative rolls. And maybe, because that is very powerful, make that crossbow require attunement. Attunement is a mechanic in D&D where it takes an hour for a player to attune to an item for them to gain the benefits of that item. You only have 3 attunement spots, and you cannot attune multiples of the same item. So one of my favorite magic items is the Ring of Protection, because it gives a boost to AC, and everyone can use a boost to AC, particularly at lower levels. So this is an item that requires attunement. It takes one of your attunement slots to be able to use, and you cannot have multiple rings of protection on at one time. So if you don't attune to this item, it's just a ring. But if you choose to attune to it, you gain that boost to your AC. Another thing to consider when making magical items is maybe you make consumable magical items. Things like potions, elixirs. Maybe you make a glass bottle with a dark, smoky liquid inside. And if they throw it, it casts the spell Darkness, but it only last a certain amount of time. And obviously, once you throw it, it's gone. Another thing that I like to use for this is crossbow bolts or arrows. So have an arrow or a crossbow bolt that does extra piercing damage or does extra fire damage, or maybe it's has the ability to actually push the target away, given a saving throw. Forced movement is a very powerful tool. And I would say using that with a consumable item is much better than accidentally giving a player an item that's way more powerful than you should have given them. It's got a built-in timer. Also, when something is a consumable item, I have found that a lot of players, if it's a consumable item, tend to just not use it and forget about it until the boss fight, or until after the boss fight when they realize, oh, that would have been really helpful. The last thing I do want to go over that we kind of touched on in another video about a feat is that you want to be careful with built-in obsolescence. Sometimes you intentionally want to do this. You want to intentionally give them an item that will eventually be thrown away for a better item. But sometimes, and particularly with weapons, because a lot of times weapons become iconic and players get used to using the same weapon, and it's good for that weapon to grow with them. So try to homebrew mechanics that, grow with the character. So maybe, like I said earlier, you add more abilities to the items as the player levels up, as the player learns more. But also, I have found that tying the item in to other mechanics like proficiency bonus or some of their ability scores also has a benefit. So kind of using the example of this longsword that we've kind of been creating during this video. Gotcha, you have a +1 longsword. It's already a magical item. But to give it more flavor, to make it more interesting, we went ahead and gave it some spell-like abilities. We mentioned the light spell and Zone of Truth. Maybe we don't give the player access to all of these all at once. Maybe, when they first encounter the sword, they can only use it to cast the light spell. And maybe instead of having it be able to do that once a day, maybe do it equal to your proficiency bonus. That way it scales with you as you level up. And again, as you level up, maybe we unlock more abilities to the sword. Maybe we bring in a backstory for the sword. Really, guys, though, the only limits here are your own imagination and your understanding of mechanics and how to make things work in Dungeons & Dragons. So that about does it for this second episode of The Cauldron. Once again, my name's Matthew, reminding you please like, share, comment, subscribe, and here's wishing you all 1d10 worth of inspiration.